Hello, welcome to Season 9 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. The theme of this season is 100 Years of Horror. We're going to watch two horror movies from every decade, from 1920 to 2020, in chronological order. We want to see where horror came from, how it's changed, and maybe even make some predictions about where it's going. If you want to see the full list of movies we'll be reviewing this season and follow along, then check out our website at thehorrific.com. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Alright, so we did the episode on Nosferatu the Vampire, and it didn't go so hot.
Right.
So we basically decided to call a mulligan.
Yeah.
I did not want our journey through the decades of horror to leave us with like that as our last impression of the 70s. So we decided to do a different movie from the 70s as a way to sort of make up for the swing and miss on that one.
Yeah, which I don't think you guys would hear it because it was said on the episode for Nosferatu the Vampire, the one from the 70s. But like our thought, or my thought when picking it out was like, it'd be cool to see like where it started, the 20s, to where like how far film had gone. Like I felt like that would be a good way to measure what we're trying to do, and we were wrong. Or I was very wrong.
Well, it really wasn't a horror movie at all, and so it was not a good selection for the podcast, and especially like this season where we're kind of looking at the progression of horror movies over time.
Yeah.
And so what we decided to do as a sort of a makeup or a retry was a movie that I have wanted to see for a really long time, because a remake of it came out recently, and I was very fascinated by that. But I always wanted to see the original, and so now we had a chance to go back and do the original 1977 version of Suspiria.
Yeah, it was a good pick, and especially, I don't know if it's because we had a bad opener with Nosferatu the Vampire, but I was very happy with it.
Yeah, and we've talked several times on this podcast about how sometimes we'll go through a period of movies that aren't so great, and then we get one that's like a sold-out horror movie, and it's almost like a palate cleanser. Like, it's just like refreshing. And the very first line of my notes was, the music and narration at the beginning were already scarier than anything in Nosferatu, and I'm happy.
That's basically what the music, yeah, it was great.
Yeah. So this was, I think, by no means a perfect movie, but it definitely had a lot more like horror elements that make for better discussion. So I'm excited to do this episode. I'm going to introduce it, and then you can do your fun facts, and then we will bore into the horrific possessed details.
Sounds great.
In 1977, International Classics brought us Suspiria, a giallo horror film that is based on the supernatural, but still has plenty of the genre's signature blades and blood. This movie was written and directed by Dario Argento, whose name you might recognize from our episode on the movie Deep Red, which he wrote and directed in 1975. Suspiria tells the story of an American ballet student who moves to Germany to study at a prestigious dance academy. When she arrives, she finds herself in the midst of a series of mysterious murders emanating from a dark secret at the school's core. This movie can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime.
Perfect. You can also watch it for free on Tubi. Further
supporting our theory that all good app names have been taken for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, what did you learn about this movie?
So Dario Argento made a cameo in this film. Did you know that?
I did not.
So in the opening murder sequence, in which two women are assaulted and brutally killed by a phantom attacker, that was basically, it was his hands.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
He was the killer. He was the cameo. That's where you would find him in that scene. Sorry, it was going on. Like, my fact was like, and a memorable scene. As I'm not about that anymore, you know.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
anyway, so he was in there at the very opening scene, which I like when directors make the cameos. I don't know why, I just like it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So to craft the music for Suspiria, Argento turned to an Italian band called Goblin, which I thoroughly enjoy. I love that name. He previously worked with them on Deep Red. Argento wanted to score the sound otherworldly, like nothing heard in film before. So the band developed an innovative sound using variety of method. So, for example, they brought African drums and a Greek stringed instrument called the bouzouki, and among other things. They even got more innovative by squeezing plastic cups against microphones to create echoing sounds, hitting metal buckets full of water with hammers, incorporating disembodied voices, and more. With Argento close collaboration, they produced an unforgettable, nightmarish score. I agree with that. I like the score. Here's the other thing. The lighting, that was innovative too. With Suspiria, this is a quote by the cinematographer. With Suspiria, we left the natural behind us in order to achieve a totally artificial style. So they left natural light out, said cinematographer Luciano Tovoli. Later said in the film, and indeed the camera does create a sense of living in the dark fairy tale world. Argento and Tovoli used numerous techniques to achieve this. Argento, for his part, insisted on keeping the camera almost constantly moving, employing numerous dolly and crane shots to give the film its dreamlike imagery. To create the vibrant blues and reds, Tovoli took massive carbon arc lights and stretched colored fabric rather than the traditional gel filters over them. This not only created vivid primary colors, but allowed him to put lights closer to the actors, flooding the whole frame with color. Pretty interesting, huh?
Yeah. I really enjoyed the style of this one.
Yeah. And this is the first of a trilogy from the 80s, which I think Inferno was next, and then Mother of Tears was the third one that came out in 2007. So this one came out, 77, then Inferno came out in 80, and then Mother of Tears came out in 2007. Talk about having to wait a long time for a sequel there. Yeah,
we talked last time, or in a previous movie, I don't know which order these are coming out in. We talked at one point about like exploitation films or like that concept, and how a lot of the things that were classified that way in the past have actually had like a really big influence more recently. And so I keep, now that I'm like thinking about that, finding parallels or connections to things that Quentin Tarantino has done. And so like the whole two movies together and then the sequel comes out like 15 years later, he did that too.
Yeah.
But this movie did it first.
Right, so. Yeah. So the last fact that I have is, and so this technically was before the remake came out, but a remake of Suspiria had been in the works for several years, and the production finally began, I guess it was 2016. Sorry, I'm reading this in past tense. Anyway, this is the quote that Argento said about the remake. Well, the film has a specific mood, Argento told IndieWire. Either you do it exactly the same way, in which case it's not a remake, it's a copy, which is pointless. Or you change things and make another movie, in that case, why call it Suspiria? I respect that.
Yeah.
Those are the facts I have about this film.
Nice. Yeah, so there is like a super elaborate kind of larger story that this trilogy of movies fits into. And I think we talked about this quite a bit when we were doing the review of the newer version of Suspiria. but I had been, after that movie, it was one that I was really like fascinated by, so I did a bunch of reading about afterwards, and was like reading all about like that mythology and stuff about like the three mother witches or whatever they're called. And then like the next day I got stomach flu, and so I woke up in the middle of the night and was like right on that edge of like fever dreaming and like super sick. But I had just read a ton about the Suspiria witches, and so I had this weird like super strange kind of like nightmarish experience where I was like going in and out of sleep and like kind of dreaming about that while also in like very extreme physical pain. It was just this like super crazy wild experience. But I think that's given me like a deeper like horror connection to these movies, because there's like almost like that biological memory that just like associates it with like sheer terror and awfulness. So my take on it might be a little bit more sympathetic than yours, but at the end of the day, I still feel like this was a good choice for a tour of horror movies through the decades, because it included a giallo film.
That's a good point. But I also know that you're saying that because you picked out this film.
Yeah, obviously.
That's why I hated this movie.
But yeah, this one, like you talked about in your facts, I feel like it definitely had a visual style, and those, like the moving camera, the artificial light, like bright light colors, and then just the gore and the bright red blood, I feel like were all a style that it maintained the whole way through. And there's something about like creating a world that you can put your brain into that I feel like it is an essential part of a horror movie. And you being able to kind of project yourself or feel that empathy with the characters in that world is like a big part of the movie being effective. And so I almost feel like by being non-realistic, this one created kind of a cohesive thing that was easier to like suspend your disbelief about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely does. I was going to say that I feel like this film was a really good example of thinking outside the box to make a horror film. So a lot of the times when it comes to like horror, and especially like my favorite types of horror, which are, you know, the slasher and things like that, like this one didn't necessarily, like this isn't a normal film that I think that I would like, as in like, you know, it's not like The Strangers or like you got Zombies with 28 Days Later, you know, just a kind of monster. Like this is a whole separate horror film that, like, it was just an original story, I guess is where I'm getting at. And it was just nice to have like original story come through, and like with the intentions of making it a horror film and not like a crazy amount of drama. Yeah, I mean, it just worked, and it was just almost like refreshing to me, like almost like a palate cleanser in the sense of like, okay, we can have films that aren't the stereotypical horror film, you know, like the formula, and still be a good film. Like, it's just nice to know that was there at one time, and you know, that they'll still happen, hopefully one day. But like normally this would be like one of my bigger, like I just probably wouldn't be a huge fan of it, but it was just like the music drew me in, and then the way that they shot the footage, it was just like that alone was a win in my book. And then like the story on top of that really just kind of helped out.
Yeah, and I feel like, kind of to your point, it's nice that they could make like a kind of weird and artistic movie, but also still be like a sold out horror movie. You know what I mean? It's like to achieve your artistic vision, you don't have to sacrifice the horror elements. And so it's just like, cool, like this is in my lane. It delivered everything that I think it was marketed as and that it wanted to be. And that made me happy. So,
right.
But yeah, there were a lot of scenes that were very kind of like classic giallo, but also just like almost like kind of brutal even by today's standards.
Yeah, 100%.
like that one towards the beginning where the girl's like super scared running away from the school. She's looking out the bathroom window, it's been raining, and then that hand just crashes through and grabs her by the back of the head and then smashes through the glass and stabs her. And you're like, man, that's brutal. And then it's like, oh no, we're not done yet. So then he puts a noose around her neck and shoves her through the stained glass ceiling. And you're like, damn, that's dark. And then her friend down below gets impaled by pieces of the falling roof window. And it's just like, okay, that's what we signed up for. This will be an interesting ride.
Yeah, it was like one of the worst, like, Rube Goldberg machines ever, in a way. You know what I mean? It's just like, what the hell? Like, but that's like what we signed up for with this film, right? Is to see like the
over
crazy,
the top.
Yeah. And that's probably one of the reasons why I enjoyed it, because, I do like the over the top, 80s action films and stuff like that. But it was just like, my thoughts were the exact same. Like, oh, holy shit, that's pretty crazy, like brutal. Like this is what we're starting off with, that's pretty brutal. And then she gets hung, and you're just like, what the hell is happening? Like, it was like a Final Destination scene almost.
Yeah.
Like where they slip, and next thing you know, they have the, some cable wrapped around their, I don't know. It was just like, holy shit.
Yeah. And so one thing that I noticed here is like a pattern. And I know that we've seen this in a ton of more like recent horror movies, but I also wonder if this was kind of like a recurring theme in Giallo. Like I want to go back and watch like Blood and Black Lace and some of those other ones, but where it's like, it's almost like there's a little bit of a mystery element to it too. So there's like some narrative stuff that moves like the mystery or the investigation forward that's kind of like creepy or dark. But then you have like the really elaborate death setup scene that ends with a bunch of fake blood. And I feel like, again, that's a thing that we could point to lots of movies that we've watched that are more recent, but it's kind of like a tried and true formula. Like even, is it Ready or Not? Was that the game movie?
Yeah, where she was that the one where she was married?
Yeah. But like even that, is one that we really enjoyed. That was a recent one, but it was really basically the whole thing. It was like you're finding out the history of this family in between a bunch of like super elaborate death scenes, and like that's a thing that still works. And that I feel like was kind of the formula that this genre or style discovered a long time ago.
Yeah. Like that was also one of the reasons why we wanted to do this, is to understand like where the films like the modern horror films kind of come into play. And it's interesting to me to see it and where we could tie it. Like we've been doing this so long, like just with the movies that we watched from starting the podcast, that it's like, holy shit, like this was, started with Suspiria or whatever, whichever film. But yeah, it's just, it's kind of fun to tie those in now while we're watching these films, and like, oh, okay, I know what this influenced, and like some of the shots that were in Suspiria reminded me of some of the same shots that were in, like The Shining, and it's just like the way that, the way the camera was panned with, a girl on the second floor of the building, but you see the whole wall, you see top it. Anyway, it's hard to explain. It just reminded me some of that too, which, came out just 3 years later, but still, Suspiria had done it first, and, I don't know how many times I would say like I know that Halloween had to be inspired by some film, just trying to figure out which one that was. And so it's just kind of cool to see them tied into each other.
Yeah. And this one, I wouldn't put this like in my top 10 or anything. It was a little slow at times. So I believe it was dubbed. I think it was originally in Italian, and they dubbed English on top of it. And I felt like the dialogue was mixed like way too loud compared to everything else. And that just kind of made it feel forced and awkward. But, and the acting, of course, was not like top notch, but didn't really need to be for what the movie was trying to do for the most part. But it mostly was just kind of like a wild ride. I wasn't really pulled into the mystery so much as I just like really appreciated certain scenes. And I think my favorite progression in the movie was when Susie and her friend are in her room, like at the dance academy, and the friend's trying to wake her up, but she won't wake up, and it's only green light in the room. And then the friend hears like the weird noises from the hall and is starting to freak out. And then she opens the door and it's only red lights.
Yeah.
And then she heads down the hall and ends up in that room with the secret passage and gets attacked, and then is trapped in a room and sneaks out the window, and then falls into a random pile of barbed wire and gets stuck, and then gets her throat cut. It just like, it kept escalating and getting worse and worse for her. And I feel like that is just such like that whole progression was just an exact summary of what this movie did over and over in new and creative ways. And so I don't know, for me, this one very much belongs on a list of like a tour through the history of horror movies.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, my favorite, so the dubbing for sure kind of messed with me. Like that was my biggest complaint. And it was just because it was kind of distracting at times. Like, and I don't know if it's because like, you know, when you have trouble hearing something, I always look at the mouth, you know, it kind of helps me hear. It's like, I don't know. It was just it just threw me off. It was like, well, that's kind of a bummer, but it's not like the end of the world, you know. Like I've watched enough Clint Eastwood westerns, you know. So it's like this isn't a huge problem, but it's just enough. But for me, like I think like if I were to talk favorite scenes, mine is actually kind of like a culmination of like from the start to after that first girl dies.
Yeah,
and the reason why is because it just like it starts with the girl, like, freaking out at the door and not letting her in. Like, it's just weird already. And then it kind of goes into that death, like, soon after, you know, it was right after. And it was just like, I don't know. It's just like, this is how you start a horror film. Like, this is how you
just
do
a
it.
punch in the mouth right off the bat.
And let's keep it up, though, you know, and they kept it up and then went some, you know, and then some, which just kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, and I was also kind of happy that I had watched the newer one first. Yeah. Because I feel like the new one, the remake, gave a much more cohesive storyline. Like, there was a lot of stuff in this one that would not have made much sense at all had I not seen the newer one.
I agree.
But it also had a very different ending. So it took me by surprise because I just assumed that the ending was going to be really similar. And so when it was totally different, that like really got my attention again.
Yeah.
And I think the ending of the newer one is still better. Like that's one of my favorite recent horror achievements. Was like the final 15 minutes of the new Suspiria. But the ending of this one, because I was expecting something else, it made it even better.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, you know, after it was done, asked Katie, you know, who was watching it, what she thought. She goes, well, I think I like this one more. I was like, oh, why? Well, it didn't end in an orgy. I was like, oh.
Well, see, that's where she and I are different.
I was like, well, okay, yeah. I can't believe they ended that second one like that. I was like, that was the best one.
For sure.
So,
but yeah.
I think for me, there were some parts that were just a little confusing throughout the film, like just trying to piece it together, like that. So it was
like, was this a witch movie or was this a slasher movie?
Right. Yeah. But it was like the dialogue, and then it did get confusing in parts, which, I mean, I understand it had to have been, you know, I would guess like a language barrier. I don't know. It was almost like it was made based off a book that
we didn't read.
Yeah. Well, that we didn't read. It's almost like the Stephen King movies that we'll watch from time to time, and it's like, man, I guarantee you they missed some part because like this doesn't make sense. There's just a few pieces, but I mean overall, like I had no beef with this. I mean, it's definitely my top 12 of the season, for sure in the top 12. We've also only done 12. So.
I was about to say, how many have we actually done? Because I'm pretty sure this would make like 13. So the only thing you're putting below it is the vampire.
Yeah.
The reason we had to add another movie.
I sit here, if you guys could see me, I was sitting here going, okay, we got the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Okay, that's
I'm
6.
Out of hands.
And so then I go, okay, so that's 2, 4, 6. Knowing that it's, anyway. But no, I would definitely watch this over a bunch of movies, like I'll watch it again for sure. And this is actually, I would say, like this and the new one are like buy-worthy. You know, like.
Oh yeah, and I really want to go watch the rest of the trilogy now.
Yeah,
too.
I think we should. For sure.
I had been hesitant to do that before because I knew I wanted to do an episode on this movie at some point, and I feel like our episodes are better when like we're experiencing it together for the first time. But now I feel unblocked, so I can go watch the next two.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, it's just interesting. I mean, it's I feel like a very original horror film for sure, and they pulled it off. I thought they pulled it off really well. Like if your biggest beef with this is that like the dubbing like is frustrating, then it's like you're good luck finding like good movies that aren't. I mean, it's gonna happen, you know. And,
well, and I think you got to be open to that too. I mean, one of the best movies of 2019 was
Parasite.
In a foreign language. You had to be willing to read. With Parasite's what I'm talking about. You had to be willing to read subtitles to do that, but it was totally worth it. So don't limit yourself.
Yeah, I mean, or just you can limit yourself too.
Dude, don't, whatever, who cares? I'm not your mom. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. If you're looking at me for advice, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
anyway,
exactly.
So,
if you're looking to us for advice, you're fucked.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.